How to check the shutter count on a Canon R6 Mark II, that's what I'm talking about in today's video. So we're gonna get right into it because the answer to this is actually very simple. At least I think it's simple, but it's also very complicated. Okay, there's two ways to think about it. So the quick answer is that I actually called Canon to ask them this question because I couldn't figure out anywhere on the internet how to actually check the shutter count on the Canon R6 Mark II. So I called them and I talked with a guy who was working there in the call center of Canon. And he basically told me that the only way that they can tell me to check it is by mailing in the camera body to them for them to check it. Basically, the places that you can check the shutter count online for free or maybe cost a little money, I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes it can come with viruses, and so it's not always completely safe for your computer or your camera. So he basically said that Canon can't legally recommend any of these other ways to do it because it could end up giving you a virus and then they'd be liable, and they can't do that basically. So that's why the only way they say to do it is to mail it into them. So we had this interesting conversation while I was on the phone with him for about 15-20 minutes. He was basically saying that, you know, he hopes that maybe Canon will eventually make some way for the shutter count to be checked like in camera or like some easier way than having to mail it in, because right now it's not really the easiest. However, if you were watching this video today and you know of a way that you can check the shutter count without having to send it to Canon, then go ahead and write it in the comments. Tell us what you did. That way we could help the others who are like struggling with trying to figure out how to do this without having to send it into Canon. Because when you do send it into Canon, you'll probably send it in for probably a sensor cleaning. And they did tell me it does cost around $139. And so if you want to avoid having to pay for it, then you might want to try one of the other ways to do it. I still haven't been able to successfully figure out one of those other ways to do it, even though I've spent several hours looking all over the internet trying to figure out what other people have done. At least you know that if you need to check it, and if you want to, you can send it into Canon and they can professionally check it for you and give your camera a nice little cleaning. I would probably recommend going that Canon route just because it is the safest route to go. However, if someone here watching this video has successfully done it themselves without Canon's help, then go ahead and write it in the comments so that we can all see what you did and like how it worked and things like that. So again, this video today was pretty short because I had a pretty simple answer, but I hope that it helped you at least understand some way that you can check it if you really desperately want to check it. Just make sure you send it in when you don't have a lot of work so that if it has to be out, you know, if you can't have your camera for a few weeks, it's not a huge problem. So that's what I would recommend doing, is sending it to Canon to check the shutter count. And again, the Canon R6 Mark II does have a shutter lifespan of about 300,000 actuations. However, it has been able to go a lot further. There's actually something really cool about this camera body because it actually has an electronic shutter and a mechanical shutter, and the shutter life will be longer if you use the electronic shutter more than the mechanical shutter, because the mechanical shutter is mechanical, so it has like physically moving parts, whereas the electronic shutter does not have physically moving parts, and so it will last longer basically. Like you could shoot a ton more on an electronic shutter and then not as much on a mechanical shutter to save the mechanical shutter's life. This is something that the guy at Canon and I actually talked about, is that if you want to save on the shutter life on the Canon R6 Mark II, then purposely shoot more on the electronic shutter than the mechanical shutter. And if you want to know how to switch between the mechanical shutter and the electronic shutter, and the electronic shutter at first curtain, that's a fun thing too, then I'm actually making another tutorial video to show you how to change between these things within your Canon R6 Mark II. So this will be a tutorial video. It'll be coming out at some point within the next few weeks. That way you can see exactly how to change that within the camera settings on your camera. So I'd actually recommend leaving it on electronic shutter as much as possible. Now there's one situation in which you will need to use the mechanical shutter instead of the electronic shutter, and that is when you're using flash. This is something that the Canon guy and I talked about, but when you are using artificial lighting such as like flash, you will need the mechanical shutter because it will support higher shutter speed rate basically. Another thing to keep in mind with electronic shutter is that it could become unusable if your subject is moving, because it could cause like weird artifacts, weird distortions, things like that. So if you are like dealing with a lot of moving subjects, you're going to need to use probably the mechanical shutter, not the electric shutter. And here's why you can't use flash with the electronic shutter. It's because the burst of flash is actually too short to illuminate the scene for long enough so that the electronic shutter can capture like all the lines on the sensor to be read. So basically like the burst of flash is just too short for the electronic shutter to do its shutter thing. Like it basically does not have enough time to read all the lines on the sensor, and that's why electronic shutter cannot be used for when you're using flash. So I would recommend using mechanical shutter. It does say that you can use electronic front curtain shutter when you're using flash, but I think mechanical probably would be safer. Okay, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but there's the bonus tip for you today in when you're using flash and shutter count, all that fun stuff. So I would definitely recommend checking out my video about how to change within your camera from electric shutter to mechanical shutter to electronic first or front curtain. I gotta check out that actually, but it'll be correct for the next video I do. So that's what today's video is about. And if this was helpful to you, then go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to come back and see that additional video I'll be making at some point in the future. So thanks so much for watching today. And if you want to know how to enable/disable dual pixel RAW on your Canon R6 Mark II, then that video is going to be next.